Hey y'all, and welcome back to another edition of Confederate Shop's Hidden Gem. So today, before I get into talking about the two books I have for our Hidden Gem series this week, I wanted to address last week's video, which was on how the Confederates were not a bunch of treasonous traitors. There are a couple historical points that I want to bring to light that I did not mention in that video, but I think it would be very helpful for a lot of people to know these facts. The commenters just loved that video. Comments are not a bad thing. They're a good thing for us because a lot of times it spreads our content. It sparks conversation. People get curious. And I address a lot of the comments simply based on the fact that I know the readers might glean something from it. So once a week, every few days, I might get on there and I might start commenting or comment back to people. But within the comments, somebody brought a point up that I disagree with, and that is that legally the Declaration of Independence doesn't mean anything. You can't use the Declaration of Independence as a precedent for secession. They think that that's foolish. But I want to bring to mind that there is a judicial system today within the past 100 years that has based legal decisions off of things that aren't within the U.S. Constitution. Now, I have an example, which is that famous phrase, separation of church and state. Separation of church and state, that phrase was never mentioned within the U.S. Constitution. Where was it mentioned? It was mentioned in the letters penned by Thomas Jefferson, right? So our legal system based legal precedent off of a letter penned within the Declaration, within one of his letters citing separation of church and state. Now, Thomas Jefferson was also the author of the Declaration of Independence. This declaration, which is the greatest ordinance in the history of mankind, in my opinion, said that we weren't going to take Great Britain's abuses any longer, that we were not governed by a king, but were governed or a parliament, but governed by God. We are given our rights by not a king, but by God, and that we were going to self-determine our government, and that was our right. That's the gist of the Declaration of Independence, the greatest secession ordinance of all time. Now, not only was it written by Thomas Jefferson, but it was signed by many of the same founders who supported the ratification of the U.S. Constitution, right? Just years after. So that's an important fact to remember when you consider using the Declaration of Independence as a precedent legally for supporting secession. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious our country was founded on the idea of secession. And the greatest ordinance of secession is the Declaration of Independence. Why can't we use that to support our cause or support our belief? But not only that, you also have Jefferson Davis after the war. Jefferson Davis, the greatest treasonous traitor of all time, right? This boogeyman, he was in prison for a couple years after the war, but he was never tried for treason. Now, our adversaries will say, well, they were doing the smart thing by trying to bring the country back together, and it would have caused more trouble if Jefferson Davis was tried, but he really was a traitor. He really was a traitor. For those of you who say that he really was a traitor, Salmon P. Chase would disagree with you. Now, Salmon P. Chase was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1864 to, I believe, 1873 before he died. Now, Salmon P. Chase was also the one who headed the famous court case, which also pertains to secession and state sovereignty, Texas versus White. But back to my main point. Salmon P. Chase was confronted with the idea of trying Jefferson Davis for treason after the war. And you know what he said. Now, you can look this up because this is a source-cited historical fact. You can look this up. He was confronted with the idea of trying Jefferson Davis for treason and said, and I'm paraphrasing, that if we try him for treason, according to the Constitution, we're going to be the ones guilty of treason according to that Constitution. So you can look that historical fact up. It's also a historical fact that Jefferson Davis was begging for a trial. He was begging for a trial according to the Constitution of if he was treasonous or not. So I think those are two interesting points that you can consider too when it comes to Confederates being a bunch of treasonous traitors. So let me get back to what I was going to talk about today, and that's the two hidden gem books that I have for you this week. Now, the first one is, this is a special book, and it's special because a good friend of ours, somebody that I knew since I was a little boy, Lloyd Sprinkle, he had a publishing company for many, many years. I mean, my whole life. And what he did was he reprinted historical, theological titles that were just fantastic books that hadn't seen the light of day in years. Now, one of these books that he produced years ago was called Chaplains in Gray, and it was a historical reprint by Charles F. Pitts. Now, Lloyd Sprinkle has since passed away, and because of that, none of these books are being made anymore. There are probably other people reprinting this book, but Lloyd Sprinkle did it in such a way that really, really honors these titles. And as with all of his books, with Sprinkle Publications books, they're done on premium paper with premium binding with a beautiful cover. So these books are meant to, and they're made to last for generations. So this book right here, I only have probably about 20 left. And once they're gone, I can't get any more. So this is going to be our book this week. What is this going to talk about? Charles F. Pitts is a good writer. And what I mean by that is he keeps you engaged with the subject matter. And especially if you like learning about Confederate chaplains, there are a tremendous amount of facts that I myself did not know. One of which that I found out from this book is that the first black chaplain to minister to white troops actually occurred within the Confederate Army. And there is historical evidence to back that up, and it's presented within this book. There were actually no official uniforms issued to Confederate chaplains either. I mean, that was kind of obvious. I didn't really know that for a fact, but like many of the infantry troops too, by the end of the war, they were wearing their maybe coats sent from home and trousers that they picked up somewhere else. So there wasn't an official uniform given to Confederate chaplains, but this book is chock full of some fantastic, phenomenal stories of the hardships and trials that these chaplains went throughout the war. So get yourself a copy. Like I said, I only have about 20 left. I've got some here in my warehouse. That's one stack. I think I have a few more at the shop on the bookshelf. So once they're gone, they're gone. So get yourself a copy of this. I had to mention this one as well. I have plenty of this book for now. Jackson and the Preachers. So this is going to focus on one of our greatest biblical heroes of all time, in my opinion, Southern heroes. Not only was he a phenomenal tactician and soldier and leader of men, but he was a man of God, and really all of his character can be summed up in his spiritual life. His spiritual life was a tremendous part of him. It's how he could be so brave. I would say even that's how he got the name Stonewall, because he stood in the face of cannon fire like a stone wall, and his men called him Stonewall. That was based off of the fact of his favorite verse, which was Romans 8:28. For all things happen for good to those who love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I'm glad Sunday school paid off years ago, making me memorize those verses, but that's one of my favorite verses too, and it's a verse that he lived by. But his life was tremendously impacted by men of God who surrounded him. And there are many that are well known. And I have a little list here because this list is what is talked about in this book. Reverend George Junkin, Dr. William S. White, Reverend James Graham, Dr. Moses Hodge, R.L. Dabney, Beverly Tucker Lacey, James P. Smith, and others too. Some of these men, one was his father-in-law, one was his chief of staff, one was his personal pastor. The list goes on, but this book is going to focus on the lives of these men, the experiences they had and impact they had on Stonewall Jackson. So this is a great book to also have on your shelf. So two phenomenal theological titles this week, and you need to have them on your bookshelf, and you can support our shop here too. So I sincerely appreciate everyone's support here, and my life's going to get a lot busier because my wife and I are having another baby next year, so that's going to be another huge change, and I'm going to become even more busy than I already am, which I'm thrilled about, honestly. So God is good. I thank him for that blessing, and I thank you all sincerely for supporting our shop and our mission here and our work here. Thank you all. Have a good day.